The Pittsburgh Steelers are now just days away from their second preseason game, and as the roster begins to take shape, the biggest question is becoming impossible to ignore. If the season started today, which players would actually make the 53-man roster? This is where things become especially interesting, because every roster spot has a cost. Keeping one player could mean losing another, and the competition for a few of these positions is becoming extremely tight. Based on the latest observations from training camp and preseason, there are already some surprising names rising into the conversation. One of the biggest positive surprises has been Gabriel Rubio. Coming into training camp, he was not viewed as a clear candidate to make the initial 53-man roster. Now, that has changed. Rubio has reportedly looked very good against the run, and after a strong first preseason game, he is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The Steelers appear to have found a player who is making a serious push for a roster spot, and Rubio's rise is one of the most interesting developments from camp. But while Rubio is pushing his way up, other players are finding themselves on the outside looking in. Kaleb Johnson was specifically mentioned as a player who currently has a difficult path to the 53-man roster, and that is where this projection gets complicated. The Steelers simply cannot keep everyone. Starting with the offensive line is one of the biggest areas where the roster numbers matter. The projection initially included 10 offensive linemen, but after a correction, the final projection moved to 9. That is important because every spot saved somewhere on the roster could potentially be used at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, or another position. At quarterback, the projection keeps only 3 players: Aaron Rodgers, Mason Rudolph, and Drew Allar. The biggest name missing is Will Howard, but this is not because Howard is viewed as a player who should simply be released. The idea behind the projection is much more interesting. If Howard continues to perform well in the preseason, another team could potentially become interested enough to trade for him. The possibility discussed is that Howard could play well enough to generate meaningful trade value, possibly bringing back a higher day 3 draft pick. At the same time, there is another side to the quarterback debate. Mason Rudolph has also looked solid, particularly considering the pressure he faced, and there is a clear argument that he could be the quarterback another team might be interested in acquiring. The key point is that keeping 4 quarterbacks on a 53-man roster creates problems everywhere else. That is why 3 quarterbacks appear to make the most sense in this projection. Keeping 4 would mean sacrificing depth at another position, and that is a major issue when the Steelers are already facing difficult decisions at wide receiver, running back, and offensive line. At wide receiver, the projected group includes DK Metcalf, Roman Wilson, Michael Pittman Jr., Jamison Williams, Ben Skowronek, and Jeremy Bernard. And among these players, the discussion around Roman Wilson and Jeremy Bernard is especially fascinating. Wilson is currently projected as the primary slot receiver. His best performances have reportedly come from the slot, while his quieter moments have come when he has been playing outside. That does not mean Wilson will never move around the formation, but the expectation is that the Steelers could try to maximize his production by giving him plenty of opportunities inside. Bernard, meanwhile, could be one of the most flexible players in the entire offense. He has played both outside and in the slot during training camp. His ability to block and gain yards after the catch could allow the Steelers to use him in different ways and move him around the formation depending on the matchup. There are still some details to clean up, including false starts and other mental mistakes, but Bernard has consistently flashed enough potential to establish himself as a major part of the conversation. The competition at running back is also creating a difficult decision. The projection keeps Jaylen Warren, Rico Dowdle, Travis Homer, and rookie Riley Nowakowski. The biggest surprise here is Kaleb Johnson being left off the projected 53-man roster. The reasoning is partly about roster numbers. Nowakowski is a 5th-round rookie who has been used frequently in training camp, while Homer brings special teams value. When the Steelers are already trying to fit 3 quarterbacks, 6 receivers, 9 offensive linemen, and multiple tight ends into the roster, there is simply very little room left. And that brings us to one of the most important battles on the entire offense, the offensive tackle situation. Dylan Cook is currently projected as the starting right tackle, with Broderick Jones positioned behind him, but this competition may not be finished at all. Jones reportedly had a rough start to training camp, but his play has improved significantly over the last 2 weeks. He has continued to work his way back physically, adding muscle muscle and moving closer to the level expected from a starting tackle. At the same time, Cook struggled in the first preseason game. That creates a real opportunity. If Jones continues to improve while Cook does not take a step forward, Broderick Jones could make a serious push to win that starting right tackle job. Max Starks has also been absent from practice for more than 2 weeks, making this battle even more important as the preseason continues. The pressure is everywhere on this offense. The Steelers are not just trying to determine who their best players are. They are trying to determine how many players they can keep at each position without leaving another part of the team dangerously thin. That is why the quarterback situation may become the defining question of the entire 53-man roster. Aaron Rodgers, Mason Rudolph, Drew Allar, and Will Heyward all have a place in the bigger picture, but there may only be room for 3. A trade could change everything. One strong preseason performance could change everything, and the decision the Steelers make could have a major impact not only on the opening day roster, but also on the future of the quarterback room. And as these roster battles continue to intensify, the question is becoming impossible to avoid. Who would you keep, and which quarterback would you be willing to leave off the Steelers' initial 53-man roster? If the offensive side of this 53-man roster projection is already difficult, the defense may create even more painful decisions. The Steelers are projected to keep 25 players on defense, along with 3 specialists, and that means the battle for the final roster spots could come down to versatility, special teams value, and one simple question: can the team risk losing a player by trying to move him to the practice squad? The specialist positions are the easiest decisions in this projection. Chris Boswell, Kevin Johnson, and Christian Kuntz are projected to take those 3 spots, leaving the real drama for the defense. The defensive line is one of the most interesting areas. The projection keeps 7 players, creating a deep rotation built around Derek Harmon, Cam Heyward, Keeanu Benton, Sebastian Joseph Day, Gabriel Rubio, and other players competing for the remaining depth spots. And the rise of Rubio is once again impossible to ignore. The argument for keeping 7 defensive linemen is not just about what these players can do today, it is about protecting the team against the reality of an NFL season. Injuries can change a defensive line very quickly, and the Steelers have experienced depth problems in the past. The projection specifically points to the importance of keeping a player with interior pass rush ability who could provide a skill set that may be difficult to replace elsewhere on the depth chart. There is also concern that some talented players might not make it through waivers if the Steelers try to move them to the practice squad. At outside linebacker, the projected group includes TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig, and Jack Sawyer. This is a tight group, and the roster projection does not leave much room for additional edge players. That is another example of the difficult math involved in building the 53-man roster. Every position group is connected. Keeping an extra edge rusher could force the Steelers to reduce the numbers somewhere else. The inside linebacker group could be even more crowded. Patrick Queen, Cole Holcomb, Peyton Wilson, Ellendon Roberts, and Carson Bruner are all projected to make the roster. 5 inside linebackers might seem like a large number, but there is an important reason behind it: special teams. Bruner has reportedly shown enough potential as a linebacker to continue his development, but his value as a special teams player is also a major factor. Holcomb is another player who can contribute in that area, while Roberts brings a physical presence and the kind of mentality that makes him difficult to remove from the roster. The projection suggests that all 5 players could realistically have roles on game day, which makes the idea of cutting one of them much more complicated than it first appears. Then we arrive at one of the most fascinating decisions on the entire defense: safety. The projection keeps only 3 true safeties, with Jaquan Brisker, Deshaun Elliott, and Rayshawn Jenkins making the roster. But the reason the Steelers could potentially operate with only 3 is Jalen Ramsey. The projection views Ramsey as a player who could be moved throughout the defense and used as an additional safety when necessary. That flexibility changes the entire roster equation. If Ramsey can give the Steelers snaps at multiple positions, they may not need to dedicate another roster spot to a traditional safety, but this is also where a player like Robert Spears-Jennings enters the conversation. Spears-Jennings is one of the strongest candidates to challenge for a roster spot. The argument for him is clear. He can play multiple positions, has special teams value, is young, and reportedly had a strong preseason performance. months. There is also concern that the Steelers may not be able to get him through waivers if they try to place him on the practice squad. In fact, the projection discussion suggests that Spears-Jennings could replace Rayshawn Jenkins on the initial 53-man roster. The reasoning is based not only on what Spears-Jennings could contribute immediately on special teams, but also on his long-term upside. He began his career at Oklahoma as a special teams player before developing into a starting safety, and the belief is that his development could continue at the NFL level. At cornerback, the Steelers have another problem, although this is a good problem to have: too much depth. The projection includes Joey Porter Jr., James Pierre, Asante Samuel Jr., and Chandon Sullivan, while Ramsey's versatility again gives the group additional flexibility. The file also highlights several players who have made plays during training camp but may still struggle to find room on the 53-man roster. Deshaun Jameson, Daneko Slaughter, Devin Boykin, and Israel Mukwamu are among the names involved in the discussion. That means the practice squad could become just as important as the initial roster, and that brings us to one of the biggest messages behind this entire projection. The 53-man roster is not the complete team anymore. The practice squad is critical. Players released from the 53-man roster must first clear waivers before they can return, which means every difficult cut comes with a risk. Another team can claim a player, and the Steelers could lose someone they had hoped to keep developing. Among the players identified as priorities for the practice squad are Jamin Davis, Brandon Smith, Robert Spears-Jennings if he does not make the 53, Max Harmon, Lou Nichols, Israel Mukwamu,